Welcome back to Chess TV. In this week's episode, we prepared a new story in the chess history. A brand new and tricky chess puzzle. Albert will continue his journey into the thoughts of Machiavelli and how they apply on chess, and in the opening score, which will lead us further into the Queen's Indian. But before I hand over to Albert, here's the latest news from the chess world. First of all, we're very proud to announce that Professor Arne Johansson has written and published a new book on Swedish printed chess literature before the 20th century. It is a great piece with beautiful pictures that give an insight into Swedish chess literature in its early ages. The Vietnam Chess Federation is inviting everyone to the second HD Bank Cup Open Chess Tournament 2012, which will be played starting March the 1st in the Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. The 9-round Swiss tournament has a prize fund of $30,000, so hurry up and sign up if you have the chance. The preliminary stage of the Vladimir Petrov Memorial has played on Thursday and Friday at the German City Museum in Latvia. The tournament was played in 2 groups based on rating and over 9 rounds with the time control of 15 minutes plus 6 seconds per move. The top 4 finishers from the A tournament were Friedman, Karolin, Krasenkov and Kovalenko. All 4 qualified to continue the competition in the main final tournament, where they'll team up with Ivanchuk, Morozevich, Mamediyadov and Shirov. The very popular Games Festival is back. It will be played at the 5-star Porto Karas Grand Resort in Halkidiki in northern Greece from April the 16th to the 22nd, and includes the World Amateur Chess Championship, the Alexander the Great Open and Hibi Open. Already 2 months before the start of the festival, there were over 200 players registered from Brazil, Norway, the Philippines, USA and India, to count a few, setting the competition on pace for a record. And huge congratulations are in order to Polish champion Grandmaster Mateusz Bartel, who won the 2012 edition of the Aeroflot Open that took place 7th to the 15th of February in Moscow. We'd also like to congratulate Dragan Solokan, who recently won the Turkish championship after his victory in the last round against the youngster Igi Koksay. Another national championship that was recently decided was the 34th Bulgarian Open Chess Championship 2012. It was won by Grandmaster Ivan Cheparinov. Congratulations! And now it's finally time for Albert, so here we go.
This time I thought we would talk about new principalities conquered by others' troops and fortune. Sure, it sounds like the ideal solution to obtain what you want without having to pay the price of the battle with your own men or pieces. But there are risks to receiving power served by someone else. The main one being that you have no control. The people have no loyalty to you, and the legitimacy of your exercise of power can always be questioned. A prince who has received his power from someone else must rely on the benevolence of the donor and his or her fortune. And as Machiavelli wrote, benevolence and good fortune are 2 very volatile and inconsistent things. I think this idea is somewhat reminiscent of gambits in chess. Let me give an example. You probably heard about the Danish gambit, you know, the one where white, in his 5-first move, sacrifices 2 pawns on the queen's side. Black receives a considerable material superiority. A 2-pawn advantage can usually easily win a game. But after this opening, Black is so much behind in development that the position is far worse than White's, despite the material advantage. The 2 bishops' diagonals in combination with the queen can quickly create serious threats. And that's because Black has allowed White to control the game. Black has passively compiled, and for that he has received a tangible benefit, but is now at the grace of White. It's like driving a car and then taking your hands off the wheel and letting someone else or something else steer and control what happens next instead of you. The best response in the Danish gambit is to give back the sacrifice and acquiring your own power over the game instead of receiving what is handed over to you by someone else. I personally think you can apply this to most things in life, because it's like some wise person once said at some point in time, the best in life, the things that are really worth having, are the ones that you have fought hard to accomplish. And then there's also the fact that it is only when you know how much blood, sweat and tears that have gone into something that you really can appreciate it.
Last week we analyzed the Queen's Indian defense, something we'll continue with in this week's episode as well. In our previous episode we analyzed the basics within the opening, and today we'll finish off a loose thread, namely the line which follows after bishop to b4 check and bishop to d2 in this position. Black can now choose between quite a lot of different moves, and among them are bishop takes on d2 check, a5, queen to e7, and bishop to e7. Bishop takes on d2 check is the simplest and most popular choice, and white answers by recapturing with the queen. To take back with the knight is possible, and it might be considered preferable to recapturing with the queen, but that's not true, since the knight is better placed on c3 than on d2, and because of this, the recapture with the knight is usually avoided. Black castle kingside now, and for those who believe this to be a boring and static position from which nothing can happen, I'll show you a variation which proves the opposite. Because if black after knight to c3 is to play knight to e4, and if white now plays queen to c2 followed by black taking the knight on c3, white can, instead of recapturing on c3, play knight to g5. Black is to play. He has two pieces hanging and white threatens to checkmate in one move. But to his advantage, he's a piece up, and both the knight on g5 and the bishop on g2 are unguarded. So what should black do here? Well, black stands before two choices. Either he plays knight to e4, or black plays queen takes on g5. After knight to e4, white can choose to take it with either the knight or the bishop. It might seem as if knight takes on e4 is a bad choice, since black can pin the knight by playing f5. But white can escape his troubles with knight to f6 check, followed by rook takes on f6 and bishop takes on b7, giving white a rook for a bishop. Instead of f5, trying to pin the knight, black is fine after knight to c6. The other possible move, bishop takes on e4, can seem as the more tempting option, since it gives white the rook for a piece, even without black blundering. Because black doesn't want to lose his h7 pawn, black has to exchange bishops on e4, after which white threatens both the same old checkmate on h7 and the rook on a8. Obviously, black gives up the rook by taking the knight on g5, and after white takes on a8, black plays knight to c6. This position is very complicated, and even though white has a material advantage, the position is still equal because of the inactive white pieces compared to the fairly active black pieces. If we go back a bit and return to the position before black's knight to e4, we see the other possible option, queen takes on g5. If black does this, white's next move, bishop takes on b7, is as well as forced, and against this, black takes on e2 with the knight. This seemingly unnecessary sacrifice is played since the knight really can't go anywhere else. So instead of passively waiting for white to take it, black gets a pawn for the knight. White shouldn't take the rook now, but recapture the knight, since it otherwise could capture on d4, causing a lot of trouble for white. So after queen takes on e2, black develops the knight to c6, and now white can take on a8, exchanging the bishop for a rook. The difference between this line and the line which followed after knight to e4 and bishop takes on e4 is that black has gotten a pawn more in the exchange, but for this extra pawn, white has bought freedom for his queen. It really isn't interesting to see how the game would progress from here, but as white you'll have to be extra careful not to let too many pawns go, since that can lead to terrible consequences. So before we end this week's episode, I want you all to remember that tactics are a part of the game, and even though the position might seem calm and collected, simple moves like queen to c2 and knight takes on c3 can lead to a position where you have to tread very carefully. I'll be back again next week with more on the Queen's Indian, so see you then.
So it's once again time for this week's chess challenge. If you thought last week's puzzle was complicated and almost impossible to solve, you just have to change your approach to this puzzle because you'll be facing an even harder puzzle today. But whatever you do, do not give up. Look at it as if you were standing in the gym in front of the weights. Instead of taking a 3-pound dumbbell, take the 4-pound one and perform 2 extra sets. Sure, there will be a lot of sweating, but the feeling of succeeding is priceless. So, are you ready? You have 1 minute to find the 3-move checkmate that white performs on black. Good luck. Let's see if you found the right combination. You did indeed get a tip there that the first move should be a rook move, but if we just ignore that for a second, I assume that the variation you did watch were the ones started with knight c5 or knight c7 or queen b7. If we start with the queen sacrifice, we can quickly conclude that it does not result in a checkmate in 3 moves. Well, it does indeed look as a brave move, but after that the king just captures the queen. We just don't have a checkmate in the 2 moves that are left. The variation starting with knight c5 looks like it has potential. The plan is obviously a checkmate on b7, but after pawn b6 we have a checkmate in 4 moves and not in 3. So let's take a look at knight c7 as a first move. Once again, we don't have a checkmate here in 3 moves, but in 4. So these 3 variations are only to throw away. The right first move here is the incredibly shrewd move rook c6. Black has here 3 alternative answers. He can capture the knight, capture the rook, or he can move down the king to a8. If black captures the knight, we play rook capture on c7 check, and after king a8 we have a checkmate on b7 with the queen. So let's rewind and look at what happens after a capture of the rook. What we answer with here is to play knight c5. Black can't do anything else than to move his king to a8, allowing us to play queen b7 checkmate again. And let's also take a look at black's third and last answer, which is playing the king to a8 in this position. What we do is to play rook c7, and black has here 2 alternative answers, king a7 or pawn b6. If the king goes to a7, we checkmate with queen b7 checkmate. And if black chooses the pawn move instead of the king move, we move our queen to d5, resulting in a beautiful checkmate. So well done everyone. I'm going to be totally honest with you and admit that it took a while for me too to find all the variations in this puzzle. But good things come to those who look for them. So now it's time for this week's chess historical episode with Professor Arne Johansson, and tonight's theme is Adolf Ludwig Gustav Friedrich Albert Baden. So enjoy!
In November last year I talked about a rather strange painting at the Gripsholm Castle. It is a portrait of a person who is known as Badin, which is French for jester or joker. He was probably born in 1747 in the West Indies on the Danish island St. Croix, and was a small slave boy when he was taken to Denmark and subsequently brought to Sweden as a gift to the Queen Lovisa Ulrika. He was baptized in Sweden as Adolf Fredrik Ludwig Gustav Fredrik Albert Badin, but his original name was simply Cauchy, and he was known as Badin. He became a good friend of the royal children and later well known in the theatre circles in the city life of Stockholm. But at least I had the impression that he had been almost completely forgotten. But that is a conclusion that probably should be somewhat modified. In the portrait we see him sitting in front of a chessboard, and when we recently visited the Nordic Museum, we actually succeeded to find exactly this chessboard. There we could also see the fantastic small chess pieces made by King Adolf Fredrik himself and given to his wife Lovisa Ulrika, whose interest in chess was well developed. It is therefore not surprising that also Badin was taught to play chess. One thing that I missed when I talked about Badin last time was that he was the central figure in a play at a theatre in Lund in the south of Sweden during the spring of 2010. The play was called Porslinsnegrer, which can be translated to Negro figurines in porcelain. And Badin was there played by Alexander Karim, whom we see here in this photo taken by Peter Westrup. The director of this play, Dennis Magnusson, also had the impression that Badin was forgotten, since the subtitle of the play was Badin and His Time, a forgotten chapter in Swedish history. A further thing that I missed last time I talked about Badin was that the Swedish comedian and chess enthusiast Hans Alfredsson wrote an article in 1987 about the Badin portrait in the annual report from the art museums here in Sweden. His article is entitled Black Plays White and starts with a statement that the portrait is painted by the famous Swedish Rococo portrait painter Gustav Lundberg, who was born in 1695 and became 91 years old. The article gives some background facts about Badin, but above all, the portrait, which only shows a small part of the chessboard, is used to speculate about the complete position. Hans Alfredsson writes, if I translate to English, let us pretend that Badin is engaged in a game with his playmate, the young Prince Gustav, later King Gustavus III. Alfredsson observes that Badin, who holds a knight in his hand, plays white, and that his happy face suggests that he has a winning position, which Alfredsson proposes to be this interesting position. From the article I translate further, Badin now moves his rook from h8 to h1, check. Prince Gustav realizes that his position is hopeless and knocks his d4 bishop over, and it remains lying in the painting. With a smile, convinced about his winning position, Badin now lifts his knight from e4, click. Now Lundberg paints his portrait. Well, we end the quote there. Well, Badin now should place his knight at g3 with a check. And if black moves his king to h2, he will be mated after 3 knight to f1 check, followed by, for instance, g takes f1 and being promoted to queen, after which follows rook to h8, queen to h3, and rook takes h3 with a mate. If black instead responds to the check from the knight with king to g1, white moves his rook from e8 to e1 with a check, and if now king to h2, white mates with queen to h4. And if instead black, in response to the check by the rook, takes the pawn on f2, it will follow rook to e2 check, king to g1, and rook takes g2 with a mate. Hasse Alfredson ends the article with a statement that Badin can now stand up and move over to the Chinese porcelain table where a servant stands and get a well-deserved Bischoff drink. Well, with that little addition to the previous story about the parentheses in Swedish chess history, we end for today, but we'll return next week, so see you then.
Thank you so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed this week's episode and that you'll be back again next week, so hope to see you then. Bye!